What if I told you that forbidden fruit you've been told to strictly avoid, that rich, dark indulgence you feel guilty even dreaming about, might actually hold the key to stabilizing your spiraling blood sugar and reversing the very damage that drives type 2 diabetes? It sounds like a cardiologist's fever dream, I know. But the scientific literature tells a fundamentally different story. Most diabetics are fighting the wrong war, armed with outdated prohibitions that often strip them of the very dietary tools that could help them win. The truth is, chocolate, the right kind of chocolate, is not the villain. It's a powerful pharmaceutical disguise, hiding molecules that don't just manage glucose, but actively repair the metabolic machinery that processes it. I'm Dr. Liam Cooper. I am a specialist in metabolic health and nutritional biology. For more than 2 decades, I have stood shoulder to shoulder with thousands of patients, real people just like you, who are drowning in confusion, restriction, and a profound, secret sense of dietary failure. Week after week, they ask me, with equal parts dread and hope, can I ever have chocolate again? The standard answer is no. My answer is, which chocolate do you mean? Because one type spikes your insulin faster than white bread, while another has a glycemic index lower than most fruits, reduces the systemic inflammation that drives your disease forward, and can even stimulate the regeneration of your pancreas's lost beta cells. The diabetic who doesn't understand this difference isn't failing. They are being failed by generic, incomplete advice. Today, we're not just busting myths, we're deploying advanced nutritional science. I'm going to show you 5 specific forms of chocolate that the clinical evidence supports. We will dissect exactly how each one bypasses your broken metabolic signals, and I'm going to teach you how to decode any grocery store label so you never get tricked by marketing again. Let's look at the absolute foundational truth that dictates this entire metabolic equation. Your body does not react to chocolate, it reacts to cacao. When you look at a mass-produced, brightly wrapped bar in the supermarket aisle, you are looking at an industrial confection. It is a chemical architecture built primarily out of refined sucrose, hydrogenated palm oils, and emulsifiers, with just enough heavily processed cocoa dust thrown in to legally use the name. That product will spike your blood sugar, trigger an acute inflammatory response, and drive insulin resistance. But when we strip away the industrial processing, we are left with the raw biological powerhouse of the cacao bean. Cacao is not a candy. It is a highly concentrated delivery system for a specific class of polyphenolic compounds known as flavonoids, specifically monomeric catechins and oligomeric epicatechins. In my 20-plus years of clinical practice, I have watched the scientific consensus catch up to what metabolic biology has always known. These specific molecules possess a unique structural geometry that allows them to interact directly with your cell membranes. They do this through 3 highly sophisticated, distinct pathways. First, they target endothelial nitric oxide synthase, or eNOS. This is an enzyme inside the lining of your blood vessels that triggers the release of nitric oxide, causing your vasculature to relax and dilate. When your blood vessels are healthy and responsive, tissue perfusion increases. This means blood can easily deliver insulin and glucose directly to your skeletal muscle cells, which are responsible for clearing over 80% of the sugar from your bloodstream. Insulin resistance is, at its core, a vascular communication failure. Cacao flavonoids help clear that static. Second, these compounds alter your body's intracellular antioxidant defense system. They don't just neutralize free radicals on a one-to-one basis like a standard vitamin. They actually activate a genetic pathway called NRF2. Think of NRF2 as your cell's master thermostat for inflammation. When cacao flavonoids activate NRF2, your cells ramp up their own production of powerful internal antioxidants like glutathione. This directly protects the delicate insulin receptors on the outside of your cells from being warped and deactivated by chronic oxidative stress. Third, and perhaps most profoundly, the epicatechins in cacao have been shown to influence the survival genes within your pancreatic beta cells, the specific cells located in the islets of Langerhans that manufacture and secrete insulin. In advanced type 2 diabetes, these cells are continuously subjected to glucotoxicity, causing them to burn out and die. Advanced cellular models demonstrate that epicatechins can modulate pathways like mitogen-activated protein kinase, effectively shielding these cells from apoptosis and encouraging cellular survival and structural integrity. The entire secret lies in maximizing these flavonoids while keeping the glycemic load at 0. Let's begin with the first practical tool on our list: dark chocolate with a verified cacao content of at least 70%. This is the baseline entry point I recommend for patients who are terrified of losing the sensory pleasure of food. At 70%, the bitter, medicinal qualities of the cacao are perfectly balanced by just enough sweetness to satisfy a deep psychological craving. But biologically, something beautiful happens here. The glycemic index of a true 70% dark chocolate bar hovers around 22. To put that into perspective, the glycemic index of a standard baked potato is roughly 85, and a slice of whole wheat bread sits around 71. A glycemic index of 22 means that this food causes a remarkably flat, slow, and prolonged glucose curve. The mechanism behind this is pure macronutrient synergy. Because 70% of the bar consists of the physical mass of the cacao bean, it is naturally packed with cacao butter, which is rich in stearic and oleic fatty acids and dense prebiotic fiber. When you consume 2 squares of this after a meal, the fat and fiber act as a biological brake inside your stomach. They significantly delay gastric emptying, meaning the food moves out of your stomach and into the small intestine at a literal crawl. Because the transit time is slowed down, any carbohydrates present in your stomach are broken down and absorbed into the bloodstream at a fraction of their normal speed. Instead of a sharp, jagged glucose spike that forces your pancreas to pump out emergency insulin, you get a gentle, manageable wave of energy that your body can easily process. Moving past the entry point, the second tool on our list represents a profound biochemical shift: dark chocolate with 85% cacao content or higher. To the untrained eye, moving from 70% to 85% seems like a minor adjustment in flavor. In reality, it changes the entire metabolic footprint of the food. At 85% cacao, you are drastically altering the ratio between the delivery system and the active compounds. The sugar content plummets by nearly half compared to a 70% bar, typically dropping to a meager 10 to 14 grams per 100 gram serving. Concurrently, the concentration of active monomeric flavanol skyrockets. You are effectively removing the metabolic vehicle and maximizing the therapeutic agent. Let me give you a concrete example from a clinical study that I share with my pre-diabetic and diabetic patients. Researchers tracked 60 individuals with established type 2 diabetes and concurrent hypertension over an 8-week period. One group consumed 25 grams of 83% dark chocolate daily, which delivered a standardized dose of 450 milligrams of flavonoids, while the control group received an identical amount of white chocolate, which contains no cacao solids. The findings were remarkable. The dark chocolate group experienced a highly significant reduction in systemic inflammatory biomarkers. Specifically, high-sensitivity C-reactive protein, hs-CRP, interleukin-6, IL-6, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF-alpha, dropped measurably. Why does this matter to you? Because these 3 markers are not just random letters on a lab report. They are the chief chemical messengers of chronic, low-grade tissue inflammation. This underlying silent inflammation acts like a physical barrier, coating your cellular insulin receptors and physically blocking insulin from binding to them. By using a highly concentrated dose of 85% cacao flavonoids to downregulate these inflammatory cytokines, you are essentially cleaning the rust off your cellular locks so that insulin can open the doors to glucose once again. Furthermore, the vascular benefits extend directly to your long-term survival. Large-scale epidemiological data, including landmark Swedish cohort studies, have confirmed that consistent intake of high-percentage dark chocolate reduces the overall risk of ischemic stroke and cerebral hemorrhage by up to 27%. For a diabetic patient over the age of 50, whose risk of vascular accidents is already statistically doubled or quadrupled due to chronic endothelial damage, this cross-protection is not a minor luxury. It is an absolute priority. The clinical protocol for this tier is 20 to 25 grams daily, which usually equals 2 dense squares. Because the sugar is so minimal and the bitter polyphenols are so highly concentrated, a fascinating neurological phenomenon occurs called sensory-specific satiety. Your palate registers the intense, robust chemical signature of the cacao, and your brain's appetite center signals complete satisfaction much faster than it ever would with a sweet, highly palatable milk chocolate bar. The food naturally enforces its own portion control. The third type on our list pushes this logic to its absolute limit: 100% pure cacao and raw cacao nibs. This is chocolate entirely stripped of its commercial identity. There is 0 added sucrose, 0 milk solids, and 0 chemical additives. It consists exclusively of the expression of the roasted or cold-pressed cacao bean. From a glycemic index perspective, it doesn't even register on the scale. Its glycemic load is effectively 0. It contains virtually no net carbohydrates, consisting entirely of complex plant fibers and unique cacao lipids like stearic acid, which is fully neutral in its impact on low-density lipoprotein, LDL cholesterol. Raw cacao nibs deserve an independent spot in your metabolic pharmacy. These are simply the raw heart of the cacao bean, shattered into small, crunchy fragments before undergoing any thermal processing, conching, or emulsification. Because they escape the high heat of industrial machinery, they retain the absolute highest possible density of heat-sensitive antioxidants and delicate bioflavonoids. Because 100% cacao is intensely bitter and completely devoid of sweetness, I rarely advise my patients to sit down and chew on it like a traditional candy bar. Instead, we treat it strictly as a powerful functional ingredient. Think of it as a metabolic spice. For example, stirring a teaspoon of crunchy cacao nibs into plain organic Greek yogurt creates a massive texture contrast while providing a rich flavor profile. Melting 10 grams of 100% solid cacao and blending it directly into a tablespoon of raw, unsweetened almond butter creates a decadent, high polyphenol dessert that delivers an immediate rush of protective epicatechins without causing even a single-point ripple on a continuous glucose monitor. The fourth tool in our metabolic strategy shifts focus to those who need the familiar, sweet flavor profile of traditional chocolate, but cannot afford even a single gram of added sugar. Sugar-free chocolate sweetened exclusively with erythritol or stevia. This category is a powerful bridge for compliance, but it requires extreme clinical precision because it is a minefield of food industry deception. First, let us understand the clean science of what genuinely works. Erythritol is a naturally occurring 4-carbon sugar alcohol, or polyol. From a metabolic standpoint, it is a fascinating molecule because its glycemic index is absolute zero. When you consume erythritol, its unique molecular structure prevents your digestive enzymes from breaking it down. Roughly 90% of it is rapidly absorbed in the small intestine, enters your bloodstream completely unchanged, and is excreted completely intact through your urine within 24 hours. It never undergoes hepatic metabolism in the liver, meaning it causes zero rise in blood glucose and absolutely zero stimulation of insulin secretion. Stevia operates on a completely different biological pathway to achieve the same clean result. Extracted from the leaves of the Stevia rebaudiana plant, its sweetness comes from intensely potent compounds called steviol glycosides. These molecules are up to 300 times sweeter than sucrose, yet your body lacks the metabolic machinery to break them down for energy. They pass through your upper digestive tract without being absorbed, producing a net glycemic impact of zero. When a chocolate manufacturer uses a base of clean cacao mass and sweetens it strictly with erythritol or a high-purity stevia extract, they create a product that mimics the smooth texture and comforting sweetness of traditional milk or light dark chocolate, but with a flat metabolic footprint. For a diabetic patient managing intense sugar cravings, this is a highly effective tool for long-term behavioral compliance. However, this is exactly where the food industry sets its most dangerous trap for the diabetic consumer. If you walk into almost any major U.S. pharmacy or supermarket and pick up a mainstream bar explicitly labeled sugar-free or diabetic-friendly, you must look past the large print on the front. Flip the package over and look at the tiny print on the ingredient list. In a massive percentage of these products, you will find that the primary sweetener is not erythritol or stevia. It is maltitol. Maltitol is a sugar alcohol that food corporations love because it is incredibly cheap and behaves exactly like sugar in industrial machinery. But biologically, it is a disaster for anyone managing type 2 diabetes. Maltitol has a glycemic index of approximately 52. For context, pure table sugar has a glycemic index of 65. This means maltitol is highly capable of causing massive, unexpected blood sugar spikes, especially if you eat more than 1 or 2 small squares. Furthermore, because maltitol is not well absorbed in the small intestine, it travels down into the large bowel completely intact. There, it acts as an osmotic agent, drawing massive amounts of water into your colon while being rapidly fermented by your gut bacteria. In an older or more sensitive digestive system, this process triggers sudden, agonizing abdominal cramps, severe bloating, painful gas, and acute diarrhea. I have sat with countless patients who called my office in complete distress, terrified that their diabetes medication was failing them, only to discover that their morning blood sugar spike and severe gastrointestinal distress were caused entirely by a sugar-free chocolate bar loaded with hidden maltitol. Your strict clinical rule for this category is simple. If the ingredient list explicitly names maltitol, sorbitol, or hydrogenated starch hydrolysates, you must put it back on the shelf. You are looking exclusively for clean erythritol, stevia extract, or monk fruit. Brands like Lily's are excellent, widely available examples of chocolate that adhere to this clean formulation. Now we arrive at the fifth type of chocolate on our list, which stands as the absolute pinnacle of this nutritional protocol: pure, unsweetened cacao powder. If we were to look at this entire list through the lens of a clinical prescription, pure cacao powder is the raw, unadulterated active pharmaceutical ingredient. It is completely stripped of the industrial processing, added fats, emulsifiers, and solidifying agents that are mandatory for creating a solid chocolate bar. Because of this, it represents the absolute highest concentration of bioavailable flavanols per single gram of any form in which cacao can be consumed on Earth. To understand why this is so remarkably effective, we have to look at a definitive landmark publication in the field of metabolic research. In 2021, a team of clinical investigators published a rigorous systematic review analyzing multiple randomized controlled trials, specifically evaluating the impact of cacao flavonoids on individuals with established type 2 diabetes. The consolidated data across these clinical trials revealed a profound conclusion. The daily introduction of 25 to 30 grams of pure cacao flavonoids produced a highly significant, measurable reduction, not just in daily fasting glucose, but in hemoglobin A1C. I want you to think about the gravity of that finding for a moment. Your daily fasting glucose is just a snapshot. It changes based on what you ate last night, how well you slept, or how stressed you are in the morning. But your hemoglobin A1C is an undeniable record. It measures the percentage of your red blood cells that have glucose permanently bonded to them, providing a flawless 3-month average of your systemic blood sugar control. When a clinical study demonstrates a structural drop in hemoglobin A1C from a single dietary intervention, it means we are no longer just masking symptoms. We are observing a durable, systemic improvement in how your body's tissues interact with insulin and clear glucose over weeks and months. Why does pure cacao powder consistently outperform even the most expensive, artisanal dark chocolate bars in these clinical reviews? The answer lies in the harsh mechanics of industrial food production. To turn a raw cacao bean into a glossy, snappable chocolate bar, the cacao must undergo an intense series of mechanical steps known as conching and tempering. This involves subjecting the mass to prolonged friction, aeration, and high temperatures over hours or even days. While this process is fantastic for creating a smooth texture that melts beautifully on your tongue, it is absolutely devastating to the heat-sensitive plant compounds inside. The delicate monomeric epicatechins, the very molecules responsible for protecting your pancreatic beta cells, are heavily oxidized and degraded during this processing. Pure, raw, non-alkalized cacao powder skips these destructive steps entirely. It is simply the whole leaf of the plant preserved in its truest biochemical state. 1 single tablespoon of pure cacao powder delivers a more potent dose of active flavanols than an entire square of premium 70% dark chocolate, but with virtually zero added fat and a fraction of the total calories. In my clinical practice, this is the easiest tool to weave into a patient's existing morning routine. Because it is a highly versatile powder, it can be seamlessly integrated into foods you are already eating without altering your metabolic curve. You can stir a tablespoon into your black morning coffee to create a rich, antioxidant-dense mocha. You can fold it directly into plain, full-fat Greek yogurt alongside a few drops of pure stevia, or blend it into an unsweetened almond milk beverage warmed gently on the stovetop. The rich, deeply bitter profile of pure cacao pairs flawlessly with the natural fats in these foods, creating a decadent sensory experience that actively repairs your metabolism while you enjoy it. As we look across these 5 distinct options, it becomes entirely clear that the biggest obstacle standing between a diabetic patient and long-term success isn't a lack of willpower. It is a profound lack of accurate metabolic education. When you are diagnosed with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, the standard medical response is almost always rooted in absolute subtraction. You are given a massive, intimidating list of foods you must never touch again, and chocolate is universally placed at the top of that black list. This rigid, clinical prohibition completely ignores a massive branch of medical science, the profound intersection between nutritional psychology and human endocrinology. In my 20-plus years of treating metabolic disease, I have watched the devastating reality of this prohibition cycle play out in thousands of patient histories. When you completely forbid a food that brings deep sensory and psychological comfort, you don't actually eliminate the desire for that food. Instead, you create a powerful state of chronic psychological deprivation. Neurobiological research confirms that this sense of restriction actively causes a slow, steady rise in your systemic cortisol levels. Cortisol is your body's primary stress hormone, and it is a direct enemy of blood sugar control. When your cortisol climbs, it triggers a process in your liver called gluconeogenesis, causing the liver to dump stored glycogen directly into your bloodstream as glucose, while simultaneously making your peripheral tissues even more resistant to insulin. Even worse is the inevitable behavioral rebound. Nutritional psychology studies consistently demonstrate that individuals who live under intense food guilt are statistically far more likely to experience massive, unplanned episodes of overeating. When a patient who feels intense guilt finally gives in to a craving, they don't stop at 1 or 2 squares. They operate under a subconscious mentality of defeat, thinking, I've already broken my diet and destroyed my health, so I might as well eat the whole thing. They consume a massive dose of highly processed sugar and industrial fat, triggering an acute glycemic crisis, followed immediately by a wave of intense self-loathing, shame, and a vow of even stricter deprivation the next morning. This is a toxic, self-perpetuating metabolic loop that destroys your HbA1c far more aggressively than a planned, strategic indulgence ever could. Now, imagine an entirely different clinical approach. Imagine a patient who has been thoroughly educated on the cellular mechanisms we have discussed today. They know that 2 dense squares of 85% dark chocolate consumed at the very end of a nutrient-dense, fiber-rich dinner possess a glycemic index of just 22. They fully understand that the bitter epicatechins in that bite are actively downregulating their C-reactive protein, turning down the fire of systemic inflammation, and gently protecting their pancreatic beta cells from oxidative burnout. For this patient, the entire psychological framework shifts from an act of guilty rebellion to an act of deliberate, functional nutrition. The guilt completely loses its biochemical foundation. Because there is no panic and no sense of a forbidden boundary being crossed, your brain's satiety centers can accurately register the intense sensory signals of the cacao. You eat your 2 designated squares. You experience deep, genuine culinary satisfaction, and you naturally and effortlessly stop. You have achieved stable blood sugar control not through ironclad, miserable restriction, but through clear, empowering biochemical literacy. Let us synthesize this entire clinical protocol into an absolute foolproof blueprint that you can deploy in your kitchen starting tonight. We have dismantled the generic myth that chocolate is the enemy of the diabetic, and we have replaced it with 5 highly precise, evidence-based tools that transform this food into a metabolic intervention. To ensure that no clever food industry marketing claim can ever mislead you again, let us clearly review the exact specifications and label rules for each tier. First is dark chocolate with a verified cacao content of at least 70%. This remains your absolute best entry point for flavor accessibility while maintaining genuine glycemic protection. It delivers a remarkably low glycemic index of just 22, driven by natural cacao fats and fiber that slow down your gastric emptying. Your strict label rule here is to ignore the front of the packaging entirely. Flip the bar over and read the very first word on the ingredient list. It must read cacao mass, cocoa mass, or cacao liquor. If the word sugar appears anywhere before the cacao, the bar is an industrial confection disguised as a health food. Keep your portion strictly to 20 to 30 grams per day, typically 2 to 3 small squares. Second is dark chocolate with 85% cacao content or higher. This represents a massive escalation in therapeutic potency. By reducing the sugar content by nearly half, you dramatically lower the glycemic load while maximizing the active monomeric flavanols. This is the exact tier supported by clinical evidence showing a profound drop in the primary inflammatory markers that drive insulin resistance, CRP, IL-6, and TNF-alpha. Your practical protocol is 20 to 25 grams daily. The intense bittersweet profile naturally activates your brain's satiety centers, ensuring that moderation becomes an effortless, natural response. Incorporating a single teaspoon of raw, crunchy cacao nibs into plain Greek yogurt or folding 10 grams of melted 100% chocolate into a spoonful of unsweetened almond butter delivers a massive surge of heat-sensitive antioxidants with a net glycemic impact that approaches absolute zero. Fourth is sugar-free chocolate sweetened exclusively with erythritol or stevia. This is a highly effective tool for long-term behavioral compliance, mimicking the smooth sweetness of traditional chocolate without triggering a hepatic insulin response. However, you must remain hypervigilant against the food industry's favorite trap, maltitol. If the ingredient list names maltitol, put it back on the shelf immediately. Maltitol carries a high glycemic index of 52, causing unexpected blood sugar spikes and severe gastrointestinal distress. Look for clean, trusted brands that rely solely on clean polyols or stevioglycosides. Fifth is pure, unsweetened cacao powder, the absolute unadulterated active pharmaceutical ingredient of this entire protocol. It completely skips the destructive heat processing of conching and tempering, preserving the highest possible density of bioavailable epicatechins per gram. This is the precise form backed by robust systematic reviews demonstrating structural, long-term improvements in hemoglobin A1C. Integrating 1 to 2 tablespoons daily into your morning black coffee, warm, unsweetened almond milk, or morning oatmeal delivers maximum vascular protection with virtually no added fat and minimal calories. Make sure the ingredient list contains exactly one item, cacao powder, nothing else. Here is the final step in taking complete control of your metabolic health. Tonight, I want you to go into your pantry and audit every single chocolate product you currently own. Flip the packages over and scrutinize the ingredient list. If the very first word listed is sugar, set it aside. It is driving your insulin resistance. If the first word is truly cacao mass, you have found a tool that works with your biology. This week, pick up a container of pure, unsweetened, non-alkalized cacao powder. Introduce just 1 tablespoon into your morning coffee or your oatmeal and test your blood sugar 2 hours post-meal. Let your own body's biochemistry show you the undeniable data. At your next medical appointment, sit down with your physician and ask a proactive, informed question. Given my current metabolic profile and hemoglobin A1C, can we strategically integrate pure cacao into my nutritional protocol? Please remember that the information presented in this video is strictly for educational and informational purposes. It is grounded in clinical literature, but it does not constitute individual medical advice, diagnosis, or a treatment plan. It is meant to complement, never replace, the direct relationship and conversations you have with your healthcare provider. Never alter, reduce, or discontinue any of your prescribed diabetes medications, including metformin or insulin, based on information you watch online. Any adjustment to your clinical treatment must be safely managed under the direct supervision of your treating physician. I am Dr. Liam Cooper. If this video replaced dietary fear with clinical clarity, please hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment below telling me which of these 5 types you will try first, and share this with someone who needs to know the truth. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next video.